Hello there, it's Gina Gardiner here, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's show. Once again, I've got an amazing guest, Jessica Swoodeen, and she has an amazing story to tell you. After racing motorcycles as a hobby, she spent just over 5 years living in the Basque Country and traveling to work at some of the highest level racetracks in Europe. She has a technical background in race car and motorcycle dynamics, and she joined that skill with learning and teaching of racecraft. It gives her a unique perspective, and it's one that she's going to share with us today. So Jessica, a huge welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Gina.
So come on, tell the story. You can't see her, but this is a lady who is absolutely stunning, who in motorcycle racing, it's not your average lady's career, is it?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, I didn't even grow up riding motorcycles. I won motorcycle lessons at a university fundraiser for a Formula SAE team, which is quite ironic, being that the guys who gave me the motorcycle lessons, their hobby was into race cars and all this. And little did we know, 8-9 years later, I would be the one working with race cars as a full-on job, as opposed to some of those cats. So it was interesting. So I won the motorcycle lessons, and I started going on tracks to get to know my motorcycle better. And then the bug came in to go racing.
And once you got the bug, what did you do with it?
Oh my gosh, I imported a motorcycle from New Zealand because it had to be a Yamaha. I had Yamaha support. With only a Japanese manual, I started assembling my motors in my living room.
Goodness me.
And yeah, so this turned into a full-on obsession. Meanwhile, I was a mechanical design engineer working at various corporations here in Calgary. And on the weekends, I was pulling wrenches or racing myself or finding sponsors and all of this.
So what then? I mean, that's still presumably sometime in the past, or are you still doing it?
Well, I took a race school last year, and I'll be taking another race school this year to get back into it, because track riding is something is fantastic. But really, I bought that the motorcycle from New Zealand because it needed work to be done on it. And this was in a very careful plan. So I had in my head, why am I working as a mechanical engineer when I have this crazy obsession / hobby with motorcycles? And how can I marry these two? And I was basically guided to look for masters and PhDs in Europe, because that's the place to be. So I didn't want to be the boss of mechanics if I didn't know what I was doing. So I specifically bought a bike that I had to learn how to do mechanics on.
That really is taking things to, really walking your talk, isn't it? Which is something dear to my heart. But my goodness me, that is quite incredible.
Yeah, one of the other things that I did to prepare myself was I was asked to be a tuner, coach, psychologist, Reiki guide to a lady who was racing the Canadian amateurs. And one of the reasons why I said yes to her is because she's from Quebec, from the French side of Canada. And my French was okay. But by this time I had been accepted to go to Spain for this master's, to Basque Country. And I realized that going and working with her, I'm going to be surrounded with francophones. So it was another way that I could put myself in a quasi uncomfortable position, because I knew the following winter I'd be moving to a place where there was very little English.
Isn't it interesting? For most people, that would be something that they'd avoid like the plague. Why would I put myself into a place where I don't understand the language, where I'm far from home, to study something I'm interested in? Why add the layers? What was the reasoning behind it, wanting to go to Europe to study?
So you've nailed something. There was programs in Swansea in Wales, and Oxford Brookes, who I was very closely in contact with. And honestly, why I chose the quasi hard pass, well, not very quasi, it was quite difficult, was because my mom was from Newfoundland, and the Basques and the Newfoundland people have a huge history, like prior to Christopher Columbus.
Oh,
the Basque in Newfoundland, they were one of the pioneers of the cod and whaling industry, and specifically the whaling industry. So I've heard of the Basque Country all my life. And I was looking at a PhD in Italy and this and that. And then once the Basque thing came up, I said, no, this is destiny. This is my family history. I have to go there.
So you came out with a PhD.
A master's.
A master's, right.
Yep.
Sorry, let's get it right. A master's. Congratulations. Huge stuff. Then what?
Well, then I continued as a freelance race car engineer in Europe for various teams. I worked for a German team, Swiss teams, Spanish teams, and I developed a real in-depth knowledge of the different cultures. I was working with one of the Swiss teams. I think we had 7 or 8 languages underneath our tent.
Goodness me.
Yes, it was brilliant.
A real melting pot, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I was able to, learn a little bit of German, learn about the German culture, understanding that I had to take out some of my Canadian please and thank yous because it wasn't really viewed as sincere.
That's interesting.
It was quite interesting. And, in a couple of months after that, after I was given that feedback and I applied it right away, I was able to go out and have beers with the boys after a day at the track, where at the beginning I felt a little bit ostracized based on not knowing and not being aware of how to deal with various cultures. Learning
the culture of different teams and different countries, and I think this is at so many levels, isn't it? It's not just the national culture, but actually every team is going to have its own personal culture. What are the things that you learnt by dealing with so many different teams in quite a telescoped time under what I am assuming is quite a pressured environment?
Extremely pressuring. Like I've seen engineers and truck drivers and all sorts of people, they can get laid off on the spot for mistakes. So you really don't have a lot of margin, and there's a lot of money going into this. These are feeder classes getting into Formula One. So, these parents are dropping up to $50,000 in a weekend. Goodness me. Yeah. So one of the biggest lessons is asking and seeking to understand. Understanding. So, for example, when I was with the German team, I was very grateful to my boss for explaining to me, a little bit about how my Canadian type of personality was maybe rubbing people the wrong way, and understanding of how to change that. So one of the biggest lessons is seeking to understand, listening to the feedback and acting upon it. Like I had no ego when it came to this. I understood that they were saying it for my better. I could have gone back to the hotel room and cried and that, but I thought, no, I really want to understand this. And that was same with the Swiss team. We had one driver writing in Hebrew. I had a Portuguese mechanic, a German mechanic, and with each of them, you just have to understand to treat people as they want to be treated.
It's such an important lesson for life, and particularly for leadership, is to understand the individuals of your team and to create a shared understanding, a shared language that everybody knows what's acceptable and what's expected. And I think for those who are listening, that's not just true of teams in business, but true within your family. That, we're talking now, and the reality is that there are 3 languages going on. There's your language and the blueprint you have for every word that you speak and the meaning you make of that, and my language. So it could be that you are speaking bananas and I'm speaking apples, because we might use the same words, but we will define those differently. And then we have the shared language that we create, if you like, which underpins the culture, where we talked about it and we've come to a shared understanding of what those words represent. And you've given a perfect example of how that's worked in reality.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful way to succinctly wrap that into a nice box, Gina. Like that's an incredible way, because I can think of even, in my corporate days, I led all sorts of different workshops and stuff in Czech Republic and the UK and all of this. And I was very fortunate within their system to have some tools to understand how my leadership style is going to be received.
Yes.
By people in various countries based on their business styles.
You know, so many people, and I've worked with thousands of leaders now, who make the mistake of assuming that because they have said it, that it's landed in the way that they intended. And I think we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a really good reason, that we need to listen twice as hard and twice as long as we talk, in order to understand whether that person has received what we've talked about or what they mean. And in doing so, that's true communication that then underpins success. But so often people do not recognize that what they say is not landing in the way that they expect.
Yeah, many times when I was coaching my drivers, I would ask them, can you say back to me what I've just told you? You know, like, we're going to work on corner 6 to do this, or corner 7 to do this. And can you explain back to me? You know, like, are we sure we're talking about the same thing? And I find that's a technique, like you said, that you can use in your family as well. You know, when you're
it's
talking.
a technique that works at every level. You think about 2 relationships. I'm reminded of a story where I was working with a couple who were struggling. They'd been married about 4 years and they were at each other's throats. And so when they came to talk to me, I asked them to identify what their values were. And at top of both of their list was the word love. I asked them, what behaviors do you require to experience in order to feel loved? So the woman said, I need him to buy me flowers. Well, there was steam coming out of his ears. What do you mean, buy you flowers? I buy you flowers every Friday. She said, no, you don't. You put a bunch of flowers in the shopping trolley. That's not what I mean by buying me flowers. And he thought about it for a moment and he said, you know, you're right. I don't give it any more thought than I would a tin of beans. And I think when we unpick what we mean, when we understand what behaviors we require from other people in order to have our values validated, then magic happens and the relationships improve, whether that's personal or professional.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example.
So one lesson was to check in with people that they understood what you meant and to listen. And you also talked about accepting feedback. Can you give me an example, perhaps another example of where accepting feedback made such a difference to you?
Oh, absolutely. I was in a fairly high role, in a corporate role, and I had misspoken in a meeting, and it wasn't that I wasn't ready for what was being asked from me, but the project hadn't started yet. So I really didn't have any of the answers. And I came across as really fumbling and not really knowing what was going on. So I remember my boss calling me up and saying, yeah, you know, so-and-so from this meeting thought that you seemed a little unprepared. And I said, that is super unfortunate. And I need to make sure that this doesn't happen. So, sir, can you give me the rest of his feedback? And he was stopped. You know, like he really didn't think that that was the next thing I was going to say. And I said, yeah, I've got a piece of paper here. I would like to take down every single point. And the next time that I'm in a meeting with that man, this won't happen again. But also, I want to make sure that I'm living up to the expectations of the role in the way that his group is also reflected as having good leadership.
You know, that demonstrates, you talked about lack of ego. You see, I think your ego should be put under your pillow with your pajamas or your nightie in the morning and leave it behind. Don't take it to work. But there we go. That's a whole different conversation. But I also think, you know, having the humility and the readiness to learn means that you're going to succeed in such an incredible way. But I'd also say it would be useful had that leader sat you down fairly early on in your role and said to you, you know, this is how we work here, and this is our expectation of you. And then you would have had a chance to put those things in place rather than putting them right. And that would save a lot of trouble and a lot of heartache.
Yeah. And understand it's not the easy thing to do either, right? Asking for that kind of feedback. I definitely had the butterflies in my stomach. These are really high level people and roles that are our responsibilities for millions and sometimes billions worth of projects. So it's an interesting place to be in, so that you're able to, you know, even if you're scared, even if you're nervous, do it anyway.
I think that's really great advice. And one of the things I'd say to you, people who are listening, if you're in a role, particularly if it's a new role, or you've recently got promotion within an old role, go and ask and say, I recognize that I may understand your expectations, but unless you're clear with me about what those expectations are, they're just my thoughts. So what are the expectations, and what would you like to see?
Yeah.
Be proactive rather than reactive to it. How did that come about, and how did you learn it, and what's the impact it's had?
Well, for me, the impact, it was one of the biggest patience lessons that I had was really getting my butt to Europe and feeling prepared and being, like you said, proactive and not reactive. So I had imported a motorcycle from New Zealand specifically because it needed a lot more mechanics work to it.
Yeah.
And this was already when I had applied to a PhD, and I applied to the master's program. And the idea was that if I was going to be the boss of mechanics, then I would need to know the mechanics side of it. But also I wanted to learn about the marketing and understanding about how I could support my drivers. So I spent a lot of time writing articles for newspapers in Vancouver and Calgary. I hosted a motorcycle dynamicist coming from Spain, who's a British Aussie guy, very famous man. I had no idea how famous he was. And, you know, he was on that 3-year journey with me prior to me literally landing in Spain and then taking a train up to Basque Country to start my master's. And I had a lot of people saying, oh, you've been talking about this PhD or this master's for a couple of years now. But honestly, it was divine patience that brought everything together. I was able to sell a rental property right in time to make money before the 2008 crash. And just having that patience to say, you're on the path to your dreams, carry on and enjoy the journey that's taking you there. So enjoy that racing, enjoy the building of bikes, enjoy the swapping around companies to see I'm going to save enough money to take that master's in Spain.
You know, it's really interesting. I've had a couple of guests who have been talking about, you know, the difference between being involved in getting to the goal and actually enjoying the journey, and knowing when it's time to speed through and when it's time to actually take the opportunity to enjoy it moment by moment. And that's a lovely example. Thank you. Before we go any further, where can people get hold of you if they'd like to work with you?
Well, they can get hold of me. My full name, Jessica Soodeen. I'm very searchable on LinkedIn.
Can you spell Soodeen? Because on radio, it's a bit difficult for people.
Absolutely. So Jessica, and Soodeen is Soodeen.
And in what capacity do you work with people now?
So I've shifted as I went through so much professional development and a lot of leadership programs within my corporate jobs, and combining that with all of the multicultural experience and the racing and that, and really dealing with and treating myself as a high performance athlete. Now I'm working with teaching people collaborative empathy, compassion. How do we work in teams so that we're building psychological safety? Emotional intelligence is one of the biggest, I think, it's one of the biggest things that's having more light shone on it, because as we go to seek to understand other people, our words matter. It's kind of like the apples and bananas that you had started off with, you know, and that's how I really am working with people now.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Emotional intelligence is really important, isn't it? And it has been said that you get the job with your IQ, your capacity to think, but you get promotion and you keep the job through emotional intelligence. And I believe that one of the most important elements of that is being able to know yourself, to be able to manage yourself, and deal with it. For me, it's about taking radical responsibility. And if you take radical responsibility for your thoughts and your beliefs and your emotions and your words and your actions, nobody can make you unhappy or frustrated or cross unless you choose to let them. But it moves you from that place of always being a victim to other people's moods and actions to taking charge of yourself, just stepping into your genuine power, if you like.
I love that. I love that about being victimized by other people's, I think within the motorsports and the corporate world, that can happen a lot,
I think it happens in life. And that when you take radical responsibility for yourself, I've worked with so many people who, have found it very difficult in relationships, personal and professional, who once they take radical responsibility, actually understands that they are the common denominator in their life, and they are the arbiter of quality of life, because it's not the challenge that defines you, it's what you do with it. And if you decide to react to that challenge, whatever it may be, with emotional intelligence, then that situation doesn't keep you stuck in victim mode. It enables you to be the hero or heroine of your own life. And that seems to me a much better place to be.
Yeah, I love it. I love that common denominator. That's so powerful, Gina.
Well, and for me, people forget, there's patterns of behavior and it's everybody else's fault. And, you think to yourself, and I'll often reflect it back to people, well, you're talking about this person and that person and, how it's always been awful. But what's your part in this? Because you're the person who's been common to all of these situations. And that can be quite tough. But once you actually accept that responsibility, then you can start doing something differently.
And I think it's a lot easier to accept that responsibility because you've tucked that ego underneath your pillow.
Absolutely. Can you think of 2 or 3 pearls of wisdom that you would like to gift to the people who are listening?
Yes. One of the biggest pearls of wisdom I have is when you're discussing with your parents, maybe, or an aunt or an uncle, or even your friends, your dreams, and they come at you with what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? Again, exactly like what you had said earlier, Gina, about how it's up to you to receive and how you receive things. Take that as an opportunity to hone and be prepared.
Brilliant. And I think if you do that, then life really is going to change, isn't it?
Yes, I was very fortunate when I bought my second house. My mom was really concerned and she was so worried for me. And it came from a place of love. And I think anyone else might have taken it as, oh, she's just trying to stop you from reaching your dreams. And I said, heck no. I told her to hold for a moment so I could go get a pen. And I wrote down everything she said and was so much more prepared to succeed as a landlord even.
Sounds wonderful. We've run out of time. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for being my guest. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to contact me, it's Gina, Gina, at generally-u.com. Any comments or any themes you'd like us to cover, please let me know. Take care and we'll see you on the next show. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.